audience. My name is Havana Gold, and this is my mother, the Guantanamo girl,
Guantanamo girl.
Habana mold. And
Havana mold.
today we are going to teach my mom, say hi, who's looking rather lovely. We're going to teach my mom something important. I'm going to teach her a little bit about my culture.
Okay.
My culture is not necessarily the same as your culture. And so I'm going to share my screen with you, Mother. And I'm going to show you. Do you see my screen?
I see a blank screen. Yeah. I see a Kermit the Frog. So yeah.
All right, well, that's my screen. And I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and then I'm going to illuminate you. All right. So, Mom, I have a question. There are two women on the screen. Do you know these women, Mother? Hold on, my PowerPoint subscription has expired. Mother, do you know these women?
No, but you're blocking. One of them is, hold on, let me move. Can I move this? Because it's blocking.
You can click me and move me around. Yes, you can.
No, I do not.
Well, that's because they're not commonly taught about, and they're kind of contemporary. On the left, the elegant Black woman you see, her name is Marsha P. Johnson. Have you heard that name before?
No.
And on the right is a fiery Latina, much like yourself. Her name is Sylvia Rivera. Have you heard of her name before?
Hey, maybe you've mentioned her at one point somewhere.
Perhaps. Well, these are the two women. They are trans women who started the gay rights movement. So last month was Pride Month. And Pride always happens in June because on the last Sunday of June, June 28th, there in 1969, June 28th, 1969, that is the date of the Stonewall riots, which were the riots that occurred when the drag queens and the trans women and the people attending the Stonewall gay bar decided to fight back against police abuse. And the woman on the left, Marsha, she is referred to as the mother of the gay pride movement because she actually began the riots. She threw the first brick. And Sylvia, her best friend, who was also there, also participated, and they kind of ushered in a several-day riot at Stonewall, which began the gay pride movement, and it's the reason why I have rights right now. It's because of them. If they had not done that, I probably wouldn't have any rights. I wouldn't be able to probably work and be openly gay. I wouldn't be able to get married. Life would be very different. And the reason I'm teaching you about them is because Pride has kind of forgotten about them, and it's become mostly a party that more affluent Caucasian men enjoy, Caucasian gay men, and they often reject or forget, or they don't include the trans women of color who actually are the reason that Pride can even happen or have rights. It's women who did it, specifically trans women, specifically Black trans women and Latina trans women. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about them because this year we didn't really get to have a Pride because of COVID, but tomorrow, July 6th, is the anniversary of Marsha's death. She died July 6th, 1992, so I was only a month old when she died, which is like not that long ago. And I'm going to teach you a little bit about why they're so important. Now, Mother, before we continue, you were a young, vivacious, sexy Latina living in New York.
In New Jersey.
In New Jersey, Newark, for a portion of your life. Can you talk about what are some of your experiences with gay bars or how gay people were perhaps treated in that time period, in like the 80s? Were you living in New York in the 70s?
Oh, New Jersey, but I remember having friends that were gay and they were out, so I knew they were gay, and I know that they went through a lot of hardships. They weren't accepted. I have
Would
friends that were beat up and stuff.
would
And
you say it was necessarily safe for them to like walk down the street?
I think it was, no, I don't think it was safe for them,
Okay.
but I don't have that many experiences. They don't really tell me what they went through during those times when they were, if they went to a club alone. I really don't know because usually we were in big groups.
So, this is one of the most famous pictures of Marsha. Marsha's middle name was Marsha P. Johnson, and that stood for Pay It No Mind, which is what she usually referred to, what she usually responded when people asked her about her gender. And so back then, there wasn't really like a trans community like the way there is now. So though it's commonly thought that Marsha was trans, she self-identified as a drag queen, and she was an activist. And Marsha was known throughout New York and throughout her time. She moved to New York with only $15 after her parents kicked her out. Um, and she engaged in sex work, and she was homeless for a while, which is like a very common story amongst trans youth. And she began performing as a drag queen, and she was really loved amongst the people of New York and the queer people because she was like exceptionally kind. So this picture is often the one used when people talk about her, because they said that she loved to wear flowers in her hair, and she would like walk around during the day, and she would like give flowers to people and the homeless kids that she saw. And if someone like complimented something on her, she would give it to them. That she was really, really selfless. And her best friend Sylvia were out celebrating her birthday, which was also similarly in the vein of the Stonewall riots, like around that time. And they went to Stonewall, and the riot was already not beginning, but it was like in the process of beginning. The police had raided the bar, and they were lining people up, and they were patting them down and like arresting them, because at the time you had to be wearing a certain number of men's clothing, as well as you couldn't be seen basically like doing anything gay, or you'd be arrested. And so when Marsha got there, she basically said enough is enough, and she threw a brick at a police car, and that sparked the riot. Now, Marsha was a super cool person, and her memory um, of like extreme kindness uh, continues to this day. There's actually a Marsha P. Johnson Foundation that works towards helping specifically Black trans women um, who are at risk. So that's the Black trans women are like the number one type of person to like be at risk for murder, homelessness, to not be able to find a job. They are the single most marginalized type of person, especially in the queer community, but they're often overlooked even by their own community. And Marsha wasn't having none of that. Now, aside from Marsha, there was Sylvia. And Sylvia was her best friend. Do you remember that I watched the Powerpuff Girls when I was a kid?
Yeah.
So if Marsha was sort of Bubbles, she was nice and she was frilly and funny, but Sylvia was more like Buttercup. Sylvia was a Latina, and she, like Marsha, went through bouts of homelessness. She had to do sex work to survive, but she was also present, and she also was one of the driving forces that started the movement. And after the Stonewall riots were done, Marsha and Sylvia created the corporation Star. And Star was a corporation that would provide aid, housing, legal aid, medical aid to not just trans people at the time, but anyone who needed it, regardless of their orientation. And is one of the first kind of organizations to do that for that marginalized group of people. Now, Sylvia is a very controversial person because at the 1970, I believe 73, let me check my notes. At the 1973 New York City Pride Parade, they called it the Liberation Day Rally, which was Pride went through many like names and versions of itself before it just settled on being Pride. Sylvia was not invited to speak. No trans people were invited to speak at a big rally where they were giving speeches. And Pride had become much what it is today. It had become less of a protest against being treated poorly, and it had become more of a party for basically affluent white people who were gay or queer or lesbian to kind of hang out and have a good time and get drunk and do drugs and just like carry on. And Sylvia famously stormed the stage. And while people booed her at Pride, which she helped create, during more than 10 years after she helped invent the entire gay rights movement, people booed her while she demanded a stage for herself, and she stole the mic, and she was very punk rock. And I have some of her quotes here. She said, I will no longer put up with this shit. I have been beaten. I have had my nose broken. I have been thrown in jail. I've lost my job. I have lost my apartment, all for gay liberation. And this is how you treat me. What the fuck is wrong with you all? Think about that. And so Marsha started the movement, but she wasn't really like known for being as aggressive or out there as Sylvia was. So Marsha just wanted to like live peacefully and march and kind of spread the message of gay liberation through like kindness and happiness and being nice to everyone regardless of how they treated her. Sylvia, on the other hand, was more so an in your face, like confrontational person, much like myself. And so that caused a lot of controversy because people wouldn't let the two people who created Pride talk at Pride, because even within the queer community, there's a lot of racism and transphobia, and they both happen to be trans women of color. Sylvia's Latina, Marsha's Black. And so their friendship, because they were best friends, kind of changed the world. Marsha, currently in her memory, there's the Marsha P organization, the Marsha P Foundation, where I pulled all of my information from, and they help trans women of color with whatever they need, as well as there is the Sylvia, let me make sure I say it right, the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, which was started after Sylvia's death in 2002, where they provide legal aid and medical aid to anyone who needs it, because that was Sylvia's whole deal. She didn't care if you were trans, if you were straight. If you needed aid for something, she would give it to you. But they do specialize in helping at-risk minorities and at-risk sexual minorities. And so they were very, very important people who, and the reason I wanted to tell you about them is because without these two women, me, your youngest child, I probably wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't be able to like go out with my boyfriend. I wouldn't be able to like live with other gay people. We would probably be homeless, most likely, because we are, not me, but you and father are immigrants. Without the work that they did as a queer person who's a child of immigrants, I would probably, my life would have been very, very different and a lot more difficult than it is right now. So they do not teach about them in school. And even though they kind like these things were happening in New York while you lived in New York, but because voices like that are so marginalized and held down, they don't want people knowing about that. So that's why I wanted to tell you, Mother, because there are two women who have done a lot for our family, even though they died long. One died while I was a month old. When you were,
Both, the other one died too?
They're both dead. So Marcia died in 1992, the year I was born. Actually, tomorrow is the anniversary of it. And Marcia was murdered. Her death was ruled an accident, but it's commonly known that Marcia was murdered, which is how many trans women's lives end. And it's thought that Marcia was killed by the police, who were corrupt. And it is because her roommate at the time, um, who was pictured, but I don't talk about him because he got her killed, he was fighting the fact that the mob actually owned a lot of gay bars. And because it was easy money. And basically, if you were a mobster who wasn't that good at anything, they would just put you in charge of the gay bars. And her roommate at the time was fighting to take back control of Pride and take back control of the gay bars from the mob. And so the community would own their own spaces and own their own celebrations. And because they didn't like that, they ended up killing Marcia. It's thought that 4 crooked cops drowned her, killed her, and threw her in a river. And she was found the next day. So Sylvia died in 2002 of cancer. I believe she had liver cancer, but she got to speak at World Pride, which took place in Italy. And it kind of was like a full circle moment because in 1978, she was booed on stage for asking the people who had benefited so much and had gained rights from her starting Pride and the gay rights movement. Everyone had kind of progressed and like they now had more rights and they had a community, but they left her out of it and they left people like her out of it. In 2002, she got to speak at World Pride and she was kind of greeted with like cheers and treated like a hero. And that was like a really nice moment, but I couldn't find a picture of it. But even to this day now, it's 2020, not a terrible amount has changed for people like that. They still struggle more so than I would say any other type of person. When you were living in New York at the time, do you remember any kind of like, did you ever go to a gay bar? Or did you ever attend the Stonewall Inn?
No.
No?
You have to understand I was like 17, so I really didn't go out to those clubs very much. I mean, the clubs I went to, I went with my boyfriend.
Did
Sorry about the
your
contract.
did you know anyone at the time who did drag or perhaps
Yes,
and they
yes.
performed?
I don't know about performing, but I knew a couple of guys in high school who went to school with long hair and dressed like girls. And I don't really know if, I'm sure they had problems, but they were damn brave to do that because that was way back then. I don't know I know. I think one of them moved to Miami after, and I think the other one died of AIDS in the 80s.
Killed Versace.
But I remember I used to see them. I didn't hang out with them because they were they were seniors and I wasn't a senior. But I would see them. And my aunt's hairdresser was gay, and everybody knew he was gay. He didn't hide it, but he was accepted at all our parties. He organized our quinces. He was like the go-to person for all the big parties. And I didn't really hang out with them, but I knew them, and I never had issues with the fact that they were gay. I liked them. I considered them my friends. But I never put myself in the position. I never knew. I never even thought of what they were going through or how brave they were back then to just face everything and be who they wanted to be. I mean, that took a lot of guts.
Well, Mom, we're running out of time, but I wanted to
Love
teach
you
you. I wanted to teach you about 2 very important people who usually
and
don't get
thank
taught
you.
about.
I'll look more into them, two very important people, and I'm very proud of you. You're my hero, baby.
And I'm very proud of you, and I'm grateful that I have a mom who will listen to me talk about trans icons. And
You talk to me about anything you want.
my goal with this is that other people will feel more confident teaching about Marcia and Sylvia because I think specifically gay people like me, because, you know, I am Cuban, but I'm also white. And I am a cisgendered man, which means, you know, I was born and labeled a boy, and pretty much I agree with that, and that not everybody does that. And my goal is that if people can see that I can sit with my mom, who I love, and talk about Marsha and Sylvia and what they went through, that maybe the queer people who have kind of lost sight of what Pride is about, because Pride isn't a party. It's
No, I don't think so.
yeah,
Pride is
it's a protest,
a
and
movement of change.
it's supposed to remind us of where we've been, as well as who suffered to get us here, who suffered in order to make a world where me and Alejandro can hold hands in public and not immediately be killed. And the answer to that is, for the most part, trans
Those
women.
two women.
So
Mhm.
hopefully we can talk about that more, and that will, I don't know, maybe cause people to stand up for trans women more. But that was my overall goal. But thank you, Mother, for chatting with me.
Thank you, sweetheart.